Hey guys, tonight we begin beneath the desert stars, where the sands whisper stories of the earliest pyramid dreams. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, post your location and local time in the comments. Always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. You trudge across a stretch of desert that never seems to end, your footsteps sinking softly into golden sand that's still warm from the day's sun. The night sky above you stretches wide and velvet dark, pierced by 1,000 stars that flicker like ancient secrets. There's a hush in the air, like the earth is holding its breath, and in the distance, just visible beneath the moonlight, rises a faint, angular silhouette. It's not quite a pyramid yet, not the towering giants you might expect, but it's where everything begins. Long before the sleek triangular giants we know today, ancient Egyptians were figuring things out like you assembling IKEA furniture without instructions, only with far more sand and a slightly higher chance of mummification. These early structures were called mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular tombs that looked a bit like giant stone benches. Not super glamorous, but hey, you have to start somewhere. They were built for nobles and royalty, and while they weren't yet pyramids, they did have one thing going for them. They were designed to last. And some of them still cling to the desert, eroded but stubborn, after over 4,000 years. Imagine the ambition it must have taken to try building something eternal. You're in the time of Egypt's third dynasty now, around 2700 BCE, and the pharaoh Djoser has a grand vision. He doesn't want just another tomb, he wants something people will look at and go, huh. Enter Imhotep, not the scary mummy movie guy, but a real architect, priest, and polymath. Historians still argue whether he was the true mastermind, or just had really good PR, but either way, he's credited with designing Egypt's first step pyramid. That's right, before the smooth-sided wonders of Giza, there was a ziggurat-looking giant built in Saqqara. You approach it now in your mind, 7 levels stacked like a celestial staircase, each layer slightly smaller than the one below. The step pyramid of Djoser stands tall even today, cracked but proud. You can almost hear the whispers of stonecutters chipping away by torchlight, their work echoing through time. And here's where things get weird in a delightful, eyebrow-raising kind of way. Some fringe researchers believe this early pyramid wasn't just a tomb. They suggest it might have been some kind of energy generator, or a healing structure, or even a communication tower. With whom, you ask? You already know the answer. Aliens. Because apparently every time humans do something impressive without modern tech, someone decides it must have been extraterrestrial. But let's just tuck that idea into a sarcophagus for now, we'll come back to it later. As you circle the step pyramid in your mind, the wind kicks up a little sand, and suddenly the horizon blurs into waves. The desert does that, it shifts and breathes, like it's alive. And beneath its surface, countless ruins still sleep. Tombs, tools, footprints, maybe even undiscovered pyramids. We've only scratched the surface, literally. One curious discovery made near Saqqara is a deep, multi-level shaft complex almost like an ancient underground city. Called the Serapeum, it houses gigantic stone boxes weighing up to 80 tons each. Egyptologists say they were sarcophagi for sacred bulls. But here's the kicker, no one can quite explain how they were carved so precisely or moved through narrow corridors without forklifts or even, wheels. Historians still argue whether these subterranean structures were part of the pyramid building process or a totally separate religious cult. Either way, it's a mystery buried in mystery. And you're just getting started. You pass through the grand necropolis of Saqqara, the ground beneath you shifting with unseen layers of history. Every few feet, the sand seems to whisper a different story, one about a forgotten priest, or a stolen artifact, or a tomb lost to time. There's a certain humility that hits you here. These structures were built to outlast memory itself, and they mostly have. Think about this, the step pyramid was the tallest human-made structure on Earth when it was finished. Not just in Egypt, anywhere. That's like going from building a treehouse to designing the Eiffel Tower in one generation. And Djoser wasn't content to be buried in a box underground. He wanted to ascend, to rise. You can almost feel that desire built into the very stones upward, always upward. You pause at the base of the pyramid, tracing your hand along its time-worn edge. The limestone is cool, pitted, but still sharp in places. Once, it gleamed bright in the sun. And though it lacks the perfect geometry of later pyramids, it has something else, audacity. A kind of boldness that dares the heavens to take notice. Not bad for a first try. Far above, a shooting star slices the sky, vanishing almost as soon as it appears. You wonder, as the wind sighs through the ruins, what dreams those ancient architects had while sketching their impossible plans by firelight. What voices they heard in the silence. What secrets the sands still keep. And as you lie back on the imaginary dune, the soft crunch of sand beneath your head, you realize this is only the beginning. The real giants are still ahead. But without this odd, brave first step, they would never have existed. You follow Imhotep's curious footsteps as he reshapes a flat tomb into a stairway for souls. He doesn't wear a cape or carry blueprints on a scroll of glowing hieroglyphs, though you can imagine him doing exactly that. Instead, he walks with a quiet confidence, his sandals kicking up dust as he paces the ground near Djoser's burial site. It's just a wide, flat plot now intended for yet another mastaba. But Imhotep stops, squints toward the sky, and sees something different. Not just a tomb, a ladder, one meant to guide the dead up into the heavens. You're standing there beside him, figuratively of course, as he explains his radical idea to Djoser. Instead of a single-level tomb, why not stack them? Like steps. Like a staircase for the king's soul to climb into eternity. It's a bizarre proposal for the time. No one's tried anything like it before. But Djoser isn't just any ruler. He's bold, curious, and probably just vain enough to love the idea of a monument that can be seen for miles in any direction. So he nods. Approves. And the first pyramid project begins. At first they build a basic mastaba rectangle, flat top, business as usual. But then Imhotep adds another layer, and another. Before long, workers are stacking limestone blocks higher and higher until the thing begins to resemble a giant stone cake or a very angular wedding cake for a god. You walk among the workers, dodging sweat and dust and the occasional sarcastic comment. They're not slaves, contrary to some old-school Hollywood depictions. More likely, they're skilled laborers, craftsmen, and seasonal workers fed and housed by the state. Some archaeologists even found graffiti that translates roughly to the drunkards of Menkor, which, let's be honest, would make a great fantasy football team name. 6 levels go up, and the monument reaches over 200 feet tall, an unprecedented feat. To build it, Imhotep and his team invent all sorts of clever tricks. They use ramps made of mud brick, wooden sledges dragged by oxen or teams of men, and copper chisels sharpened over and over again until they're more nubs than tools. You can almost hear the rhythmic thud of stone meeting stone, the shouted instructions, the creaking of ropes under tension. The whole place hums with purpose. But it's not just about stacking blocks. There's something deeply spiritual happening here. Every level represents a stage of ascension, a progression from the earthly to the divine. The pyramid becomes a physical metaphor for the pharaoh's journey after death. You can see the sacredness in how they carved the burial chamber, deep beneath the base, and line it with blue tiles etched with stars, creating a tiny replica of the night sky underground. It's poetic in a way only ancient civilizations could manage, burying a king in darkness but surrounding him with stars. Imhotep doesn't stop at the pyramid itself. He envisions an entire mortuary complex. You follow him past towering stone walls into temples, shrines, and courtyards. The place is massive, a kind of city of the dead, with spaces for rituals, offerings, and the ceremonial processing of the pharaoh's mummified body. Everything is laid out with intention, symmetry, and symbolic alignment. The whole thing is a cosmic diagram. And yes, you're allowed to be a little impressed, and just when you think this is all very logical and sophisticated, a fringe theory comes scuttling out of the sand like a desert beetle. Some say the pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a kind of resonance chamber designed to vibrate at specific frequencies. The evidence? Mostly guesswork and dramatic YouTube videos with ominous music. But still, it's fun to imagine ancient engineers humming their way through secret rituals like some kind of Stone Age sound bath. Back in mainstream history, though, Joshua's pyramid changes everything. You feel it as you walk away from the monument, the wind tugging at your clothes like it wants to pull you back. Before this, Egypt's dead were buried horizontally, their souls presumably waddling into the afterlife. But now they climb. Now they ascend. And every pharaoh who follows looks at this strange, stacked thing and thinks, mine needs to be bigger, Imhotep. Meanwhile, gets a kind of celebrity status rare for non-royals in ancient Egypt. After his death, he's deified, literally turned into a god of healing and wisdom. Centuries later, even the Greeks know his name. Some temples honor him as a kind of ancient Asclepius, a man whose genius was so legendary it couldn't just stay human. Historians still argue whether he really built the pyramid, or if later priests simply attached his name to the marvel after the fact. Either way, the legacy sticks. You don't get to become a god by accident. As you glance back at the step pyramid from the dunes, the stars shimmer overhead like they're applauding. The stone glows faintly under the moon, weathered but eternal. You feel it in your bones. This is where the age of the pyramid truly begins, with one man's dream of staircases reaching the sky, and a pharaoh who said, "Why not?" You kick your way through soft sand dunes again, the night still warm and wrapped in a comforting hush. Just over the horizon, past Saqqara's jagged ghost shapes, you spot the outline of something strange, something leaning a bit too sharply for comfort. It's not your imagination. That's the bent pyramid. And the story behind it. Oh, it's a delightful mix of royal ambition, architectural panic, and a pharaoh who wouldn't take no for an answer. Meet Sneferu, founder of Egypt's 4th dynasty, and probably the most obsessive overachiever in ancient architecture. Where Joshusa was content with one groundbreaking structure, Sneferu looked at that and said, "Hold my barley beer." His goal? A true smooth-sided pyramid, one that didn't look like stacked rectangles but a perfect geometric triangle, rising flawlessly into the sky. But building the world's first proper pyramid was kind of like trying to bake a souffle without a recipe. It can be done, just not on the first try. Sneferu starts with the pyramid at Midam. You approach it now, and it looks weirdly chopped off, like someone took a bite out of a stone cake and walked away. Originally intended as another step pyramid, it was later converted mid-construction into a smooth-sided version. Unfortunately, someone forgot to factor in gravity. Not long after its completion, the outer casing collapsed in a giant mess of rubble. There are no ancient Yelp reviews, but you can imagine the feedback. 0 stars, fell apart while I was visiting. Undeterred, Sneferu heads to Darsha and tries again. This time he begins from scratch, enter the bent pyramid. It starts off bold and ambitious, its angle of incline sharply aggressive, like it's challenging the gods themselves. But then, about halfway up, the engineers go, "Wait, this is going to collapse again, isn't it?" You can almost see the royal architects looking at each other with raised eyebrows, nervously adjusting their linen tunics. So they do the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a pivot. They reduce the angle sharply and finish the pyramid with a noticeable bend halfway up. It's like the structure is blushing and slouching at the same time. And while it technically stands quite proudly, actually it's not exactly the poster child for symmetry. Still, you walk around it now, your footsteps crunching in the sand, and it's kind of charming in its weirdness. The bent pyramid is the only one that still retains most of its original polished limestone casing, and under the moonlight, it shines like a fossilized ice cream cone. Inside, it's even more bizarre, narrow, low passages, odd construction choices, and 2 separate chambers linked by an awkward passage, as if the builders were playing pyramid Tetris. Historians still argue whether the bend was a mistake or an intentional design shift. Maybe they miscalculated the load-bearing angle. Maybe they panicked. Maybe the pharaoh's back started hurting, and he said, "Just finish it shorter." Nobody knows for sure. But it stands as a reminder that even the most glorious legacies are built on trial and error. And some pretty bold rebranding. But Sneferu still isn't satisfied, so naturally he builds a third pyramid. This time, at the same Darsha site, he tells his team, "Let's try this again, from the top." The result is the red pyramid, named not for its mood but for the reddish hue of its limestone. This one is a triumph. Clean lines, elegant slope, no mid-project panics. It's the first successful true pyramid in history, and it still stands today, looking like it just got back from a spa day compared to its battered siblings. Inside the red pyramid, you duck your head and move through corbelled chambers that stretch upward in perfect angles, like some kind of ancient origami folded in stone. The air is still and dry, with just a faint trace of ammonia in the back of your nose. Thank the bats for that. It's eerily quiet, and as you stand in the burial chamber, you wonder if Sneferu ever lay here in death, or if his body was spirited away to another location. No sarcophagus was found inside. Another mystery for the list. Here's a quirky little tidbit. There's graffiti inside the red pyramid, scribbled by the workers. One message reads something like, "The gang, the friends of Khufu, did this." Kind of sweet, right? Imagine ancient construction crews tagging their work like modern street artists. Even back then, people wanted to leave their mark, whether on a cave wall, a pyramid chamber, or someone's camel. Sneferu's building spree wasn't just an ego trip, though there was probably a healthy dose of that. It was a proof of concept. He was refining the blueprint for what would become the greatest pyramid in history, the one his son, Khufu, would build at Giza. Without Medum's collapse, without the comical midsection of the bent pyramid, the elegant grandeur of Giza might never have happened. So thank you, Sneferu, for your architectural faceplants. They paved a way, and speaking of paving, just imagine how much limestone had to be carved, moved, and set by hand. Each of these pyramids required thousands of laborers, enormous logistical planning, and years of work. And no, they didn't use alien hovercrafts. Sorry to disappoint, though some fringe theorists do suggest levitation powered by sound waves or magnets, because obviously building ramps and dragging stones was just too obvious, right? But as you leave Darsha behind, the image of the bent pyramid stays with you. It's not perfect. It's not the biggest or the grandest, but it's oddly endearing, like an overcooked pancake that still tastes amazing. And behind it all stands Sneferu, the pharaoh who just kept trying until the dream came true. You approach the Great Pyramid under a sky slowly fading into lavender, the stars beginning to pierce through the dusk like tiny pinpricks on black silk. Towering before you is the result of everything that came before: failed collapses, awkward angles, and 3 ambitious pharaohs learning the hard way. But this is the final form, Khufu's monument, the Great Pyramid of Giza. At over 480 feet tall when first completed, it remains the largest pyramid in Egypt, made of more than 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. And you're about to wander inside. But first, pause here, just outside its base. Look up. That's not just a triangle made of stone. That's a piece of geometry so sophisticated it still messes with the minds of engineers, architects, and, yes, your high school geometry teacher, who probably wept quietly into their textbook trying to make you understand isosceles. The pyramid's proportions are uncannily precise. If you take the perimeter of its base and divide it by twice its height, you get a number so close to pi, it almost feels intentional. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians actually knew about pi, or if this is just a glorious accident of ratios. If it's a coincidence, it's the kind that wears sunglasses and walks away from explosions. If it's deliberate, then it suggests a level of mathematical understanding way ahead of its time. Step closer. The base of the pyramid forms an almost perfect square off by just fractions of an inch. The four sides are aligned with the cardinal points north, south, east, and west with such precision that modern compasses wobble in shame. Ancient Egyptians didn't have compasses, GPS, or drones, so how did they do it? Some say they used the stars, particularly the circumpolar stars that never set to align the base. Others argue they used shadows cast by the sun at specific times of day. Either way, it's more accurate than most city blocks built with modern tools. Now you're entering the pyramid through the robber's tunnel, carved much later by looters with less respect for subtlety and more enthusiasm for smashing things. The original entrance was higher up, tucked neatly into the face of the structure. Inside, you stoop through tight corridors lined with massive granite blocks. The air is thick, dry, and smells faintly of stone and ancient sweat. The temperature drops slightly, wrapping around your skin like a whisper. You pass through the ascending passage, a narrow ramp that climbs at a sharp angle, the walls pressing in. And suddenly you emerge into the grand gallery, a soaring, corbelled hallway nearly 30 feet high, a stone throat carved upward toward the heavens. The precision here is staggering. Each corbelled layer juts out just a few inches further than the one below it, forming a vault-like ceiling that is held firm for over 4 millennia. No mortar, just perfectly shaped stones, locked in place by physics and, let's be honest, sheer stubbornness. The path leads you to the king's chamber, where a granite sarcophagus sits alone, lid missing. No treasures, no body, just silence. The walls are made of enormous slabs of red granite transported from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Some of these blocks weigh more than 60 tons. You try not to think about how they got them up there, but your brain itches anyway. Ramps? Levers? Collective willpower. Fringe fans whisper about anti-gravity tools or lost technology from Atlantis. You're not sold on the aliens yet. But hey, it would explain a few things. One of the wildest math mysteries lies right here in this chamber. Some researchers believe the room's dimensions encode not just pi but the golden ratio as well -1.618 and change the same divine proportion used in everything from Greek temples to modern architecture. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Khufu had an architect who saw the universe as a giant math problem with spiritual meaning. It's the kind of detail that makes your brain go pleasantly fuzzy, like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in a dream. And then there's the air shafts. They're small, too small to crawl through, but they're angled perfectly to point at specific stars. One shaft aligns with Orion's belt, associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. Another with Sirius, the star of Isis. These weren't just air vents, they were soul highways, celestial corridors for the king's spirit to ride straight into the night sky. Historians still argue whether these shafts served purely religious functions, astronomical ones, or some clever combination of both. But as you look through one, you can't help but feel like you're peeking into forever. A fun little curveball. The pyramid originally had a swivel door, yes, a 20-ton secret trapdoor made of stone that could be opened from the inside but was invisible from the outside. Indiana Jones would be proud. It was so well balanced that a single person could push it open, though only if you knew it was there. The only other pyramids known to have this feature are those of Sneferu, Khufu's dad. Apparently, good design runs in the family. And here's your fringe tidbit for the night. Some believe the entire pyramid was a kind of ancient power plant, harnessing telluric currents and transmitting energy through quartz-lined chambers. The theory includes buzzwords like vibration harmonics and plasma fields, which sound very cool and are probably complete nonsense. But still, they make you look at the structure a little differently. What if it wasn't just a tomb? As you exit the pyramid, the sky is fully dark now, and the structure looms behind you like a slumbering titan. The sheer perfection of it all still lingers in your mind, the angles, the alignments, the cosmic ambition. It's not just a pile of rocks. It's a mathematical love letter to eternity. You wander now through the Giza Plateau in the early morning hush, the last of the stars winking out overhead as the horizon glows faintly orange. The pyramids still stand behind you, patient and silent, as if they know people will always keep asking how. How did the ancient Egyptians build these colossal structures with such precision? How did they move stones heavier than trucks without cranes or forklifts or even a decent pair of gloves? Theories swirl around the sand like dust devils, and depending on who you ask, the answer ranges from ropes and ramps to lasers and little green men. Let's start with the sensible stuff. Archaeologists, those poor folks who spend their lives sweating under the sun, with tiny brushes and infinite patience, have pieced together a rather practical picture of pyramid construction. It turns out the answer isn't so much alien tech as it is human endurance and smart engineering. Most of the labor force was likely made up of skilled workers, not enslaved masses as was long assumed. Recent excavations of worker villages near Giza show well-fed communities with evidence of beer, bread, meat, and even medical care. Hardly the lifestyle of oppressed slaves. These were proud craftsmen, masons, haulers, architects living beside their projects like modern-day construction crews in hard hats and sunburns. The stones, quarried locally for the most part, were dragged on wooden sledges over slick sand. And here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient Egyptian paintings actually show workers pouring water in front of the sledges. For years, historians thought it was a ceremonial gesture, like a may the sand be soft kind of vibe. But recent studies show it was brilliant physics. Wetting the sand reduces friction significantly, making the heavy loads easier to pull. Imagine that your high school physics teacher was right, and it took 4,500 years for everyone to admit it. Then there's the ramp theory. Most scholars believe massive ramps were built alongside or around the pyramids so workers could drag the blocks upward in stages. Some ramps might have been straight, others zigzagging like switchbacks up a mountain. The logistics are still debated. Did they dismantle the ramps afterward? Were they part of the final design? Historians still argue whether the main ramp wrapped around the pyramid like a stone parking garage, or climbed straight up the middle like a divine escalator. Either way, the ancient Egyptians didn't have the wheel not for this task, at least so ramps and brute strength were the name of the game. And the tools, you'd be surprised. Copper chisels, $1 pounders, wooden mallets. Nothing fancy. Just an enormous amount of elbow grease and a civilization willing to spend decades perfecting the angle of a triangle. Some researchers suggest they used the stars to plan their measurements, plumb bobs to find vertical lines, and levels made with water balls. It's like building the Taj Mahal with IKEA tools, and no manual, and somehow getting the screws in the right holes on the first try. But now we cross into spicier territory. Because there's always that one uncle at the family barbecue, usually wearing cargo shorts and sunglasses at night, who leans in and says, "Yeah, but what if it was aliens?" And look, as a bedtime story, it's hard to beat. The ancient aliens theory suggests that the pyramids were far too advanced for humans to have built alone. Proponents argue that the sheer size, the mathematical precision, and the alignment with celestial bodies point to extraterrestrial involvement. Some even claim the pyramids are power stations, star maps, or alien landing pads. According to these theories, our ancestors merely watched in awe as star beings hovered above, sapping rocks into place with tractor beams, and possibly mumbling something about crop circles. A favorite fringe claim is that the Great Pyramid sits at the exact center of Earth's landmass. True? Sort of. The pyramid is remarkably well positioned, but calling it the center of the Earth feels a bit like declaring your living room the geographic heart of the universe, because your Wi-Fi works best there. Another wild one. Proponents say that if you scale up the pyramid's dimensions by 43,200, they match Earth's equatorial circumference almost perfectly. Coincidence? Divine insight? Or just a very determined ancient surveyor with a sharp stick and a lot of time? Some conspiracy theorists also love pointing to the fact that no hieroglyphs were found inside the Great Pyramid. Aha! They cry. See? No inscriptions means aliens did it. But pause for a second. That's like saying your minimalist neighbor is secretly a lizard because their walls are bare. The lack of decoration could easily be an intentional choice, a religious one, or simply a matter of function over flair. Not everything in Egypt was meant to be read like a comic book panel. One of the juiciest alien-leaning theories involves sound and resonance. Some believe the pyramid's chambers were designed to amplify and focus specific frequencies. The granite in the king's chamber contains high amounts of quartz which reacts to vibrations. Was the pyramid a massive tuning fork? A sound-based energy generator? Or just a really echoey tomb? Historians still argue whether these resonance effects were intentional, coincidental, or the ancient equivalent of slapping the side of your radio to make it work. Still, there's something deliciously entertaining about these fringe ideas. Even if they're not based in solid archaeology, they reflect our deep, almost childlike awe at what ancient humans accomplished. We look at those perfect angles and towering stones and think, surely they had help. But maybe the real mystery isn't how they built it, but how we ever doubted them. So here you are, walking back through the sand with a head full of ramps and aliens, hammers and lasers, and that one sledge-pulling guy who probably invented fluid dynamics without even realizing it. You squint up at the Great Pyramid once more. Whether it was built by sweaty humans with clever tricks or benevolent star beings with a fondness for triangles, one thing's clear, it worked. It's still here, still perfect, still refusing to tell us all its secrets. You duck low beneath the crumbling lintel, torchlight flickering off sandstone walls as you enter the tight, whispering corridors that snake within the belly of the pyramid. These are no grand halls, at least not all of them. Some of them are just narrow, steep shafts barely wide enough for your shoulders, carved with the kind of precision that suggests obsession or divine pressure. Or maybe both. The deeper you go, the more you start to feel it, the weight of all that stone above you. Millions of tons pressing down, silent and unmoving, like a sleeping god you really hope doesn't wake up. While most tourists only visit the main corridors, the king's chamber, the grand gallery, there's far more going on inside this geometric beast. The real intrigue lies in the hidden places, the unmapped voids, the strange passageways to nowhere, and the dead ends that seem far too symmetrical to be accidents. Some are old, others recently discovered with advanced tools like cosmic ray-worn scanners. Yes, that's a real thing. Scientists literally bombarded the pyramid with subatomic particles to see what might be hiding inside. And in 2017 it worked. They found an enormous, previously unknown chamber just above the Grand Gallery. Historians still argue whether it's a hidden hall, a structural quirk, or the ancient Egyptian equivalent of an attic filled with unopened boxes and ancient tax returns. You shuffle into one of the known smaller spaces, the so-called Queen's Chamber, which, awkwardly, never held a queen. The name was a Victorian guess, because apparently nothing screams royal feminine energy like empty stone and mild claustrophobia. This chamber sits lower than the king's and features those mysterious air shafts we talked about earlier, narrow tunnels that don't quite reach the outside. What were they for? Ventilation? Symbolic stargates? Low-budget escape routes? No one knows. In 2002, a robot was sent into one of the shafts. After a slow crawl upward, it reached a small stone door. Behind it, another door? Because of course there was. Nothing in here is simple. Just stone teasing stone. One of the more eerie parts of crawling around in these corridors is realizing how much of this place was sealed off on purpose. Not just with doors, but with sliding blocks, fake chambers, angled passages meant to confuse or trap. The ancient architects weren't just building, they were guarding. Whether it was from robbers or from something more mythic, well, that depends on your caffeine intake. But here's a fun, unsettling tidbit. Ancient texts do speak of curses, and while no official hieroglyph reads enter and die Loel, workers took tomb security very seriously. In fact, many pharaohs stopped building pyramids partly because they were just too obvious. Big triangles on a flat desert, basically giant steal me signs. And yet some chambers remain stubbornly intact, like the subterranean pit deep beneath the pyramid. It's roughly hewn, weirdly shaped, and looks more like a mine shaft than a royal suite. Some scholars think it was an early attempt at a burial chamber. Others believe it was symbolic, meant to represent the underworld, or the primeval mound from which life began. But the real mystery is why it exists at all. Why start carving this far down, then abandon it? Was it a failed plan? A decoy? Or something darker left behind when even the builders said, nope, too creepy? Fringe thinkers have a field day in these spaces. They claim some of the chambers resonate at strange frequencies, deep, low vibrations you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. Theories abound: sonic healing centers, consciousness amplifiers, alien tech closets. One even suggests the whole internal layout of the pyramid mimics the human brain, with the king's chamber sitting where your pineal gland would be. That's right, welcome to the pyramid as third eye stimulator. Somewhere your yoga instructor just got goosebumps. But even without aliens or chakras, the atmosphere in these hidden chambers is undeniable. The walls don't just reflect light, they seem to swallow it. The silence isn't just quiet, it's loaded, heavy, like the space itself is waiting for something. Or someone. Your footsteps echo in unnatural ways. Your breath sounds like someone else's. Rationally, you know it's just acoustics and imagination, but still, you don't linger long. Now let's talk about the graffiti. Yes, graffiti. Because even the ancients couldn't resist tagging things. Inside the upper relieving chambers above the king's chamber, accessible only by tight vertical shafts, and likely never meant to be entered again, archaeologists found rough red paint markings, scrawled by workers. These were crew names and job notes, not curses or poetry. One even mentions Khufu by name, which is part of how we know the pyramid was built during his reign. Not aliens, not wizards. Just Bob from Quarry Team A, leaving his mark on history with what was basically Khufu's boys were here. And yet, these dusty catwalks and tight shafts remain an archaeological tease. Every decade or so, new tech allows a deeper peek, and each time the pyramid gives up another little secret, then slams the door again. Like that still unexplored void above the Grand Gallery. No one's been inside. We don't know if it's a room, a trick of architecture, or just a really fancy stone air bubble. For all we know, there's a pharaoh's private journal up there, or a perfectly preserved ancient cat playing with a feather on a stick. The point is, it's still hidden, still waiting, as you finally climb back into the sunlight, blinking, dusty, and maybe just a little haunted. The wind kicks up across the plateau. Sand scrapes softly against the stone. The pyramid looms behind you, still keeping its secrets, still daring you to come back. You picture it now, thousands of sun-baked bodies hauling blocks through blistering sand, overseen by whip-cracking overseers shouting in ancient Egyptian. That's the classic movie image, right? Slaves in loincloths, eyes full of despair, building a triangle under the cruel command of a god-king. It's a scene that's burned into pop culture, thanks to old Hollywood epics and Sunday school murals. But here's the plot twist. That version might be total nonsense. You trudge alongside what might have been one of the pyramid's workforce camps, just a short walk from the base of the Great Pyramid. Here, in the dusty shadows, archaeologists uncovered remains of large stone dormitories, bakeries, even hospitals, evidence of a bustling, organized settlement. No chains, no whips, just rows of ancient beer jars and enough bread ovens to feed a small army. Welcome to Pyramid Base Camp, where your job is to move multi-ton stones, but you get carbs and craft brew. It turns out the builders may not have been enslaved people at all, but conscripted laborers, working in rotating shifts, almost like national service. These men, and possibly some women, were farmers during the Nile's flood season when fields were underwater and useless. So instead of binge-watching whatever the Bronze Age equivalent of Netflix was, they headed to Giza, picked up chisels, and got to work. This wasn't forced labor so much as civic duty, or at least, that's the more optimistic theory. But the scholarly debate is far from over. Some historians still argue whether these laborers were truly free, or if social pressure and economic necessity made their choice more illusion than reality. It's kind of like saying your boss didn't make you attend the team-building weekend in the woods, you just didn't want to be unemployed on Monday. So, were they volunteers, draftees, indentured workers? The answer probably lies somewhere in the middle, as these things tend to do. And then there's the dental evidence. Yep, you heard that right. Archaeologists have examined the skeletons found near the pyramids and found surprisingly good signs of care. Workers' bones showed signs of healed injuries, which means they received medical attention. Their joints showed wear. Of course, pulling limestone all day isn't exactly yoga, but they weren't starved or neglected. Even more telling, some had the ancient equivalent of dental fillings and bone splints. That's right, pyramid workers might have had better health plans than your last gig waiting tables. In one of the workers' cemeteries, burial shafts reveal bodies carefully laid to rest, sometimes with pottery or amulets. These weren't dumped like disposable labor, they were honored. That implies a level of dignity and value that doesn't quite fit with the slave narrative. Plus, you'd have to be very motivated or very convinced to align 2.3 million blocks with such obsessive precision. You don't build the Great Pyramid on a diet of fear alone. You build it with engineering teams, supply managers, rope specialists, mortar mixers, and the guy who yells pull until his voice gives out. But before we rewrite the whole narrative, here's a quirky little side detail. Not everyone hauling rocks was a seasoned craftsman. Some were temporary workers, others came from distant regions of Egypt. There's even graffiti suggesting regional pride team names, hometown slogans. Imagine someone carving Thebes Crew for Life into a wall halfway up a pyramid shaft. It's weirdly humanizing. This wasn't a monolithic army, it was a chaotic, dusty, sometimes cheerful workplace, complete with petty rivalries and probably way too many inside jokes. Still, ancient Egypt wasn't a democracy. Pharaohs didn't take volunteer sign-ups on parchment. There was hierarchy in power and punishment. And just because the pyramid workers had a decent stew doesn't mean their lives were easy. The scale of the project was back-breaking. Each stone weighed several tons, and even with ramps, pulleys, and elbow grease, the labor was punishing. Most didn't live past their 30s. And despite the health care, most skeletons show signs of arthritis and compressed vertebrae, the body's way of saying, please stop lifting massive rocks. Some fringe theories still cling to the idea that massive slave armies did the dirty work. They'll point to ancient stories like those in the Bible, or draw shaky lines between Egypt and later slavery in the classical world. But the timeline doesn't really match. By the time the pyramids were being built, roughly 2600 BC, there's little archaeological evidence of large-scale slavery in Egypt. At least not the kind you'd need to sustain a construction project like this. Later on, sure, slavery expanded, but back then, things were more fluid, more seasonal, more bureaucratically exhausting. So, who really built the pyramids? Ordinary Egyptians, most likely. Farmers doing a civic job, craftsmen hired for their skill, and project managers with an eye for limestone. A vast machine of labor. Yes, but not a machine of cruelty. At least not by the standards of ancient empires. And here's your quirky cherry on top. The workers were paid in bread and beer. A lot of beer. Like gallons per person per day. The ancient Egyptian beer wasn't like modern lagers, it was thick, porridge, and probably had the texture of lukewarm oatmeal. Still, it was high in calories and vitamin B, and it got the job done. Picture it now, sweaty workers clinking clay mugs and raising a foamy toast to that day's pyramid progress. Cheers to Khufu and stone alignment. So next time you hear someone say aliens must have done it, because humans couldn't possibly stack rocks that well, remind them that humans are perfectly capable, especially if you bribe them with enough carbs and beer. Maybe that's the real secret ingredient. You tip your head back, squinting into the black Egyptian sky, and suddenly you see at Orion's belt, 3 glimmering points in a slanting line, almost like they're winking at you. And then you glance back down. The pyramids mirror them. The Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure sit on the desert plateau in a suspiciously familiar formation. The angles, the layout, it's not just close. It's unnervingly precise. Coincidence? Or were ancient Egyptians playing a cosmic game of connect the dots? This is where history steps into the planetarium. The idea that the Giza pyramids align with Orion's belt isn't just stargazer gossip, it's a real hypothesis known as the Orion correlation theory. Proposed in the 1990s by author Robert Bovell, the theory suggests that the three pyramids were built to mimic the shape and relative positions of the stars in Orion's belt. Not perfectly, mind you, there are some off-kilter details, but enough to make your conspiracy-loving uncle start sketching on napkins after dinner. And here's the kicker, this star alignment supposedly reflects not the sky as it is now, but how it would have looked around 10,500 BCE. That's thousands of years before Khufu even dreamed of a fancy tomb. Historians still argue whether the Orion matchup is intentional or a happy accident. Mainstream Egyptologists roll their eyes at the idea, pointing out that the alignment isn't exact, and that Egyptians didn't leave behind any blueprints labeled for best results, copy constellation. But the ancient Egyptians were astronomically obsessed, and we do know Orion associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife, was an important celestial figure. So maybe it's not just a star chart, but a spiritual echo, a cosmic fingerprint on the land of the dead. It's not just Orion that shows up either. The sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal points north, south, east, and west. And when we say almost perfectly, we're talking within a fraction of a degree. That's tighter than some modern buildings, and the ancient Egyptians did it without compasses, lasers, or the benefit of arguing with city permit officials for 6 months. How? One popular theory is that they used the stars. By observing the rising and setting points of certain stars over time, especially during twilight, they could find true north more accurately than some GPS signals in a parking garage. They also may have used the sun, tracking its shadow across a plumb line, or using water levels to spot exact horizontals. Either way, these weren't just stonemasons, they were surveyors, engineers, and sky readers. Picture a group of ancient guys standing on a hill, squinting into the dusk, adjusting their ropes and stakes based on star positions while shouting things like, "A little more to the left, Nebotep." This wasn't casual guesswork. It was ritual science and prestige all rolled into one. And speaking of the sun, don't forget the solar connections. The ancient Egyptians didn't just build to reflect the stars, they also tracked the sun's journey. The Great Pyramid's east face aligns closely with the sunrise on the spring and autumn equinoxes. That means twice a year, the first rays of sunlight slide directly along the pyramid's base like a glowing ribbon, a visual celebration of balance and renewal. Cosmic symmetry, anyone? Of course, this all leads to the question, why? Why go to such astronomical effort just to bury a king? Here's one idea: the pyramids weren't just tombs, they were resurrection machines. In Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife wasn't a vague cloud realm, it was a journey, a transformation, a merging with the gods. The pharaoh wasn't just resting in peace, he was becoming Osiris, ruler of the dead. And to do that, he needed to catch a ride on the Celestial Express. By aligning the tomb with stars and solar events, the Egyptians were building launch pads for divine ascension. One particularly quirky detail supports this idea. Remember those mysterious air shafts in the king's chamber? One of them, researchers discovered, points directly at Orion's belt as it appeared in the sky around 2500 BCE. Another points toward the circumpolar stars, those that never set, and were considered eternal, just like the pharaoh's soul was meant to be. So even while the pharaoh's body lay still inside a sealed granite chamber, his spirit had a first-class ticket to the heavens. And just when you think it's all neat and tidy, some modern fringe theorists throw another asteroid into the mix. They claim that the entire Giza Plateau is part of a global network of sacred sites aligned with ley lines and electromagnetic anomalies. That the pyramids aren't just burial sites or even star maps, but geo-encoded information hubs left by an advanced lost civilization or aliens, because of course aliens. Others argue they mark a cosmic clock, with star alignments pointing to a forgotten epoch in human history. Or a countdown to something. Cue dramatic music and a History Channel narrator whispering ancient astronauts. But even if you leave the intergalactic stuff aside, what's left is no less impressive. The builders of the pyramids were people who watched the sky not just with curiosity, but with reverence. They built monuments that mirrored the cosmos, that whispered to the stars across the ages. They believed that heaven and earth weren't separate, they were reflections, connected by symmetry, mathematics, and stone. So you stand there now, in the hush of desert night, watching Orion hover over the horizon. The wind shifts, brushing sand against your ankles. Somewhere in the dark, a jackal howls, Anubis's old friend, still guarding the edge of the sacred. You look again at those three pyramids, standing silent beneath the stars. And just for a second, the boundary between the heavens and the earth doesn't seem so solid after all. You're wandering the arid plains beside the Great Pyramid when suddenly your eyes catch something strange. No, not another block of limestone or a stray scarab beetle, but a colossal wooden structure, half buried in the sand, like a ghost ship marooned in the desert. Welcome to the ancient boat pits of Giza, where massive ships once lay hidden, waiting patiently for thousands of years before curious archaeologists dusted them off and blinked in disbelief. These aren't your average fishing boats either. One of the most famous is the Khufu ship, discovered in the 1950s, neatly disassembled and stored in a pit beside the Great Pyramid. At over 140 feet long and 20 feet wide, this cedar masterpiece looks more like a royal yacht than a vessel meant to sail a papyrus-lined river. It was painstakingly built with thousands of cedar planks, joined by ropes instead of nails, an ancient engineering feat that still impresses modern shipbuilders. But why would anyone bother burying a gigantic boat next to a stone tomb in the middle of a desert? And not just one, but a fleet of boats ranging from full-sized ships to smaller craft. That's where the mystery deepens, and historians still argue over the purpose. The mainstream explanation leans on Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife and the sun god Ra. The ancient Egyptians imagined the afterlife as a vast cosmic journey, a voyage across the heavens and underworld. Pharaohs were supposed to sail this celestial river in style. So these buried boats weren't for floating down the Nile. They were symbolic solar barges, meant to transport the pharaoh's spirit on its journey through the sky and beyond. The idea was that the spirit could board the boats, even if the physical ship never left its pit. But it's not all smooth sailing in the archaeological debate. Some scholars wonder whether these boats were actual functional vessels intended for use in life, ceremonially retired by burial, or simply elaborate grave goods. Could they have been symbolic, or maybe even status symbols, like burying a fleet of sports cars in a billionaire's tomb? Did the boats play a practical role during the pharaoh's life, perhaps for royal festivals or river patrols, before becoming funeral offerings? And then there's the question of maintenance. How did these wooden ships survive millennia buried in sandy pits without rotting away like a forgotten picnic table? The dry Egyptian climate certainly helps, but their excellent preservation also hints at deliberate care during burial, maybe coated in resin or carefully sealed to keep out moisture and pests. Whoever did the burying wanted these boats to last. It's like the pharaoh's travel bag, complete with his spiritual map and snacks for the journey. Maybe even an ancient Egyptian version of a carry-on suitcase. And because we love a good debate, some fringe theories have surfaced over the years. A few alternative historians have suggested these boats might have been intended for actual physical journeys, not just symbolic ones. Some claim the Great Pyramid's buried boats hint at ancient maritime prowess or secret naval expeditions lost to time. Others spin tales of alien technology disguised as wooden ships. But don't worry, we'll stick to the bread and be a kind of evidence here. One fascinating side note, these boats have inspired a number of modern reconstructions. In Egypt, craftsmen have used the original blueprints to build replicas, which some historians have sailed on the Nile to test ancient techniques. Unsurprisingly, the ships are sturdy but slow, less speedboat and more luxury cruise liner, perfect for a pharaoh who'd rather glide in style than race rapids. So, as you stand there, in the blistering desert sun, imagining the pharaoh boarding one of these wooden giants, the limestone pyramid towering above, and beside it, a silent fleet resting just beneath your feet, ready to carry their royal passenger into the unknown. Whether spiritual vehicle, symbol, or simply a mighty display of power, these boats remain one of the pyramid complex's most enigmatic treasures, their purpose still sailing just out of reach. As you step deeper into the shadows of the pyramid complex, your voice drops to a whisper, because here, etched into the walls and pillars, are secrets not just of stone, but of spirit. These are the pyramid texts, the world's oldest known religious writings, ancient spells and incantations carved directly into the tombs of Egypt's kings to guide them through the labyrinth of the afterlife. It's like the pharaohs had their own cosmic instruction manual, or as you might think of it, the ancient equivalent of a GPS, but instead of recalculating it promised eternal life. These texts first appear in the pyramids of the Old Kingdom, especially during the 5th and 6th dynasties, about 4,300 years ago. They're a collection of spells, prayers, and ritual commands designed to protect the pharaoh's soul, wake him from death's sleep, and help him ascend to join the gods. You might imagine the scribes as ghostwriters for the afterlife, carefully crafting verses that were part poetry, part magical software update for immortality. Here's a historical fact to ground us. The pyramid texts were originally exclusive to the kings and queens, inscribed only in their burial chambers. Later, these sacred words morphed into the coffin texts for nobles and eventually evolved into the more widely used Book of the Dead. It's like the ancient Egyptian afterlife newsletter went from VIP only to mass distribution, sort of like going from handwritten scrolls to your inbox spam folder. Now, some of these texts are downright eerie. They describe the pharaoh climbing invisible staircases that lead from the underworld to the heavens, slipping past snakes and demons, or transforming into a falcon that soars among the stars. Picture this: a royal ghost trying on a falcon costume like it's Halloween, fluttering toward eternal life. It's magical, poetic, and yes, slightly theatrical. One of the quirkiest bits: there's a spell that commands the door bolt of the tomb to open, telling it to unlock for the king, which is pretty much the original "Hey Siri, open Sesame" moment. If that bolt doesn't budge, the afterlife's closed for business. Historians still argue about the exact role of these texts. Were they literal instructions believed to have real magical power, or more symbolic poetry meant to comfort and reassure? Some think the spells were a psychological crutch, a way to help the living feel control over death's final mystery. Others believe the ancient Egyptians truly believed in the efficacy of these words, that speaking or carving them guaranteed safe passage beyond the grave. Here's a fun fringe idea. Some researchers speculate that the texts encode secret knowledge about astronomy, mathematics, or even lost technologies. They read between the lines and see hidden codes or maps, sort of like the ancient world's encrypted files. While most Egyptologists are skeptical, it's hard not to admire the idea that these texts might double as cosmic cheat codes. Imagine being one of the priests who inscribed these texts late at night by flickering torchlight, thinking, okay, let's make sure Pharaoh can get past any celestial speed bumps. It must have felt like writing a cosmic insurance policy. And given how much the Egyptians valued ritual precision, every word mattered. One misplaced syllable could mean a soul stuck in the wrong afterlife waiting room. So next time you picture the Great Pyramid as a static stone monument, remember, inside its walls are ancient whispered prayers and spells, a magical stairway carved in stone, built to transform a mortal king into an immortal star traveler. It's part theology, part poetry, and part ancient sci-fi fantasy all rolled into one. You dust off your desert boots and suddenly find yourself not in Egypt, but in far-flung corners of the world, where massive pyramids also pierce the skyline like stone mountain peaks. From the sandy plains of Sudan to the jungles of Mexico, giant triangular monuments rise up, prompting one inevitable question: did every ancient culture just really love geometry? Or is there something deeper, something universal about these shapes that compelled civilizations separated by thousands of miles and centuries to build such similar structures? First, let's visit Sudan, home to the Kingdom of Kush, which thrived for centuries to the south of Egypt. There, at sites like Meroe and Nuri, you'll find a whole forest of pyramids, some smaller, steeper, and pointier than their Egyptian cousins, but still unmistakably pyramids. These Kushite pyramids were built much later, roughly between 800 BCE and 350 CE, long after Egypt's Great Pyramid era. Interestingly, they seem to pay homage to Egyptian tradition, while adding their own twist, think of it, as the ancient world's version of remixing a classic song. Historians still argue whether Kushite pyramids were direct cultural descendants of Egyptian practices, or if they developed independently with a bit of friendly borrowing. Either way, these Nubian pyramids served similar funerary purposes, to honor kings and queens and ensure their safe passage to the afterlife. So, yes, geometry wasn't just a phase in Sudan, it was a vital language of power and spirituality. And then, of course, there's Mexico, where the Mayans, Aztecs, and other Mesoamerican civilizations built colossal step pyramids as focal points of religion and politics. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan and the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza are two standout examples. These pyramids weren't tombs like Egypt's, but temples, places of worship, sacrifice, and astronomical observation. You might even say these pyramids were the ancient world's multitaskers, half religious centers, half astronomical observatories, and all about impressing the crowd. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Mayan pyramid at Chichen Itza famously doubles as a giant calendar. During equinox sunsets, the sun casts a shadow down the steps, creating the illusion of a serpent slithering down the staircase, a visual pun tied to the god Kukulkan. If only ancient contractors could build that kind of seasonal flair into your local mall. The big debate among scholars: whether the idea of pyramids spread through cultural diffusion, like ancient travelers sharing ideas and styles, or whether it's a case of convergent evolution. In other words, did different cultures independently decide, hey, triangular towers that reach the sky, good idea, or did they copy from each other? It's the ancient equivalent of wondering if smartphones were invented once and spread, or invented multiple times on different continents. Anthropologists note that the pyramid shape is one of the most stable architectural forms. It's a no-brainer for building large monuments with ancient technology, especially when you want to build up instead of out. So maybe it was just practical. A broad base that tapers upward, easier to build and more resistant to earthquakes or weather than a skinny tower. On the fringe side, some conspiracy enthusiasts argue that pyramid building was a global ancient secret society signature, or proof of lost knowledge passed down from a mysterious civilization, or because of course alien architects. Their evidence usually involves sketchy alignments of pyramids across continents, or similarities in pyramid dimensions, but mainstream scholars roll their eyes politely and remind everyone that humans share universal patterns and needs. But no matter where you stand on the debate, what's undeniable is the powerful symbolism pyramids held across cultures, a connection between earth and sky, a monument to human ambition, and a testament to a civilization's ability to shape the landscape itself. So as you mentally travel from Egypt's golden sands to Sudan's dusty hills and Mexico's dense jungles, remember, the pyramid shape is a kind of ancient global language. It's geometry, spirituality, politics, and power all wrapped into one pointy package. And just like that, the world suddenly feels a little smaller, connected by stone triangles reaching for the heavens. As you edge cautiously down a dimly lit corridor deep within the pyramid, your footsteps echo off the limestone walls. You can almost feel the tension that once filled these passageways, a mix of sacred ritual and tight security, because the pyramids weren't just giant stone monuments, they were the world's first high-security vaults, built to safeguard royal treasures from the outside world. But as you soon discover, even the best ancient security wasn't enough to keep out the clever burglars of millennia past. The pyramids were sealed with remarkable ingenuity. Take the Great Pyramid's Grand Gallery, for instance. At its far end lies the so-called King's Chamber, where granite blocks weighing tons were positioned to slide into place like giant stone doors. These blocks would close off the burial chamber after the pharaoh was entombed, making the tomb seemingly impenetrable. Imagine trying to move a fridge-sized slab of rock with only ropes, wooden sledges, and a lot of manpower. The Egyptians managed to create locking systems so complex that some parts of the pyramid were completely sealed off from the outside world for thousands of years. They even built cleverly concealed passageways, false doors, and dead ends early maze technology designed to confuse would-be tomb robbers. The original architects probably thought, let's hide the treasure behind a wall that's actually another wall. If modern security firms could have seen this, they might have taken notes. But of course, tomb robbery became almost a sport in ancient Egypt, with robbers constantly inventing new ways to crack the code. In fact, the Great Pyramid's treasures were looted relatively quickly after burial, within a few decades in some cases. It's like hiding your valuables under your mattress while your cat figures out how to paw them away. Archaeologists have found evidence that some robbers tunneled through the sides of pyramids or secretly entered through poorly guarded entrances at night. These weren't just amateur burglars, either. They were often skilled criminals who knew exactly what they were after, and who could read the complex layout of the pyramid's corridors. Some gangs even disguised themselves as priests or workers to gain access. Talk about an ancient con job. One interesting historical fact: the Pyramid of Khafra at Giza contains a series of secret passages that might have been built as traps for tomb robbers. These included shafts that angled down sharply or ended in dead ends filled with rubble. Robbers sometimes got stuck or had to abandon their loot in frustration, but many managed to slip through anyway. Here's a quirky tidbit for your late-night pondering. Some robberies were so famous in antiquity that even ancient scribes wrote about them, almost like true crime stories of their day. These tales tell of robbers bribing guards, sneaking in during festivals, or using smoke and mirrors to confuse temple workers. Historians still argue whether some of the security features were designed more for spiritual protection than physical defense, whether the builders hoped the spells, curses carved into the walls might scare off burglars more effectively than stone traps. On the fringe, conspiracy theorists love to suggest that some of the pyramid's hidden chambers were purposely left undiscovered to keep the real treasures secret, possibly including alien artifacts or ancient advanced technology. While these ideas make for exciting stories, the archaeological record has yet to deliver on those claims. As you imagine those ancient robbers creeping through narrow tunnels, dodging booby traps and whispering prayers to their gods, you realize that the pyramids were not just tombs but stages for a centuries-old cat and mouse game security experts versus masterminds, locked in a battle that continues to intrigue us today. You squint upward, tracing the sharp, soaring silhouette of a pyramid against the fading desert sun, and your eyes linger on something missing the capstone. That shiny, gleaming apex, the pyramidion, is conspicuously absent from nearly every pyramid today. It's as if the pyramids stand incomplete, missing their crowning jewel, and that void invites endless speculation. Were these tops made of gleaming gold, giant crystals, or something else entirely? The mystery of the missing capstone shines almost as brightly as the pyramids themselves. Let's start with what we do know. The pyramidion was the small pyramid-shaped stone that once rested at the very peak of a pyramid, symbolically completing its form and linking the structure directly with the heavens. It was often made from a different material than the rest of the pyramid, possibly polished limestone, granite, or even covered in gold leaf to reflect the sun's rays, making the pyramid shimmer like a beacon in the desert. Historical records and some surviving examples suggest that the pyramidion was not just decorative. It held religious significance, acting like a symbolic lightning rod for divine energy, a point where the earth touched the sky. For the Egyptians, this was the point where the pharaoh's spirit would ascend, connecting with the sun god Ra. It's the architectural equivalent of putting a crown on your head before stepping out the door. Now, here's a fascinating tidbit. A few pyramidions have been found in museums, separated from their original pyramids, often heavily weathered but still bearing inscriptions or images of gods. One of the best-known pyramidions comes from the Red Pyramid built by Sneferu, the same ambitious pharaoh who built 3 pyramids, but only succeeded with the last one. This pyramidion is polished red granite, smooth and gleaming, still hinting at the splendor it once crowned. So, why are so many capstones missing today? Scholars believe they were often removed deliberately, either by tomb robbers seeking precious metals or by later civilizations who repurposed the stones for other building projects. After all, a lump of gold or finely polished granite is a tempting prize for builders needing materials. It's the ancient equivalent of a yard sale, but on a monumental scale. Historians still argue whether some pyramids may have never had capstones in the first place, or if they simply crumbled over time due to natural erosion, earthquakes, or neglect. The desert's harsh conditions are not kind to fine, exposed stone, and thousands of years can turn even the most solid granite into rubble. Here's a quirky fringe theory for your nightcap. Some researchers proposed the capstones were made of giant crystals, quartz, or other gemstones with alleged mystical powers. According to this theory, these crystal tops focused cosmic energy or served as communication devices with otherworldly beings. While this sounds like the plot of a sci-fi novel, it's true that quartz crystals have been prized for millennia for their supposed metaphysical properties. So it's not entirely outlandish that ancient Egyptians might have incorporated them into sacred architecture. Of course, mainstream Egyptologists are skeptical. They point out that large crystals of the size required simply don't exist in the area, and transporting such massive gems would have been practically impossible with ancient technology. Still, the theory captures the imagination and adds to the pyramid mystique. So, as you imagine the pyramid standing fully crowned, sparkling in the desert sun with golden or crystal apexes, it's tempting to think the missing capstones are the pyramid's greatest tease, visible proof that even the grandest human achievements leave some secrets untold, some mysteries unsolved. The desert is a master of secrets, and beneath its endless waves of sand lie whispers of pyramids lost to time, blueprints never realized, and phantom structures swallowed whole by relentless sandstorms. As you step lightly across the shifting dunes, you're drawn to the idea that what we see today might be only a fraction of the pyramid-building frenzy that once consumed ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have long suspected that many pyramids never made it past the planning stage. Some were abandoned halfway through construction. Others collapsed due to engineering errors, or were buried by shifting sands long before they were finished. These phantom pyramids are part fact, part legend, but they invite you to imagine an ancient skyline crowded with these grand triangles, some majestic, some doomed. One example is the so-called Leia Pyramid, located near the necropolis of Zoyet El Arian. It's a strange, unfinished pyramid whose core structure never got beyond the initial steps, leaving just a mysterious mound of stone blocks and rubble. Theories abound as to why it was abandoned: political turmoil, lack of resources, or simply that the pharaoh changed his mind and decided to build elsewhere. It's like ancient real estate speculation gone wrong. Even more tantalizing are rumors passed down through travelers and early explorers about pyramids swallowed entirely by the desert. For centuries, stories circulated of pyramids buried so deep in sand they became invisible to the naked eye, detectable only by subtle shifts in the terrain or satellite imagery. Modern technology, like ground-penetrating radar and infrared scans, has started to reveal some of these hidden giants, but many remain elusive, teasing archaeologists and historians. There's also the intriguing case of blueprints for pyramids, ancient papery and inscriptions that hint at ambitious designs far more complex than any pyramid built. These sketches and notes suggest that some architects envisioned pyramids with twisting staircases, secret chambers, or even mechanisms to open and close doors. Unfortunately, no surviving pyramid perfectly matches these designs, leading to a lively scholarly debate. Were these purely theoretical plans, or did some grander pyramids once stand and later vanish? This sparks a fascinating question. Did some pyramids fail because they pushed the limits of ancient engineering? Sneferu's infamous bent pyramid, which you met earlier, might be the best-known example of a structure that went awry mid-build. Could there be others that collapsed and were never documented? Quirky tidbit alert. Some fringe theorists claim that entire pyramids were erased from history by secret societies or lost in cataclysmic events, think buried under massive sandstorms or even sudden floods that changed the landscape entirely. While these ideas tend to veer toward the dramatic, they keep the allure of lost pyramids alive in popular imagination. Historians still argue how many pyramids have been permanently lost versus how many are waiting patiently to be uncovered by future expeditions. Every new find fuels the hope that the desert still guards secrets just as potent as the ones we've already discovered. So next time you picture the pyramids, remember that the three you know so well might just be the lucky survivors of an ancient pyramid boom others lost to time, wind and sand, their stories buried beneath the endless desert waves, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. As you sink into the quiet calm of the desert night, the pyramids stand silently against the starlit sky, ancient sentinels carved from stone, dust and dreams. Their legacy is as vast and enduring as the sands themselves, stretching across millennia to touch architects, mystics, and yes, even sleepy listeners like you. These dusty triangles still hypnotize us, pulling our minds into a gentle spiral of wonder, mystery, and timeless power. Think about it. The pyramids have been standing for over 4,500 years, outlasting empires, wars, and the slow march of time. Their sheer endurance is a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, giants of geometry and grit that refuse to crumble quietly. Even today, architects study their design, fascinated by the precision and scale. Modern engineers puzzle over the ancient techniques that created such perfection without cranes or computers, proving that human creativity is sometimes best expressed in the language of stone. But it's not just the physical structure that captivates, it's the mystery woven through every block and corridor. The pyramids are like a whispered riddle, inviting you to wonder what secrets lie in their hidden chambers, or what ancient prayers echo in their passages. Mystics and spiritual seekers are drawn to their energy, believing these monuments harness cosmic forces, aligning with the stars and the cycles of the sun. They see the pyramids not just as tombs but as eternal gateways, bridges between earth and the divine. And then there's the simple magic of how these stories lull us into sleep. Maybe it's the rhythm of their history or the slow reveal of ancient mysteries that calms the restless mind. As you listen, you might find your thoughts drifting along the same pathways the builders once tread, your breathing syncing with the timeless pulse of the desert wind. Here's a little smile for your sleepy brain. The pyramids have inspired everything from Hollywood blockbusters to bedtime podcasts, proving that no matter how old they are, these stone wonders can still capture the imagination of the modern world. Imagine a pyramid-themed lullaby rock by Pharaoh on the desert sand, not the catchiest tune, but hey, it would be memorable. Historians still argue about many details, how exactly the stones were moved, what went on in those hidden chambers, or what the missing capstones really looked like. But maybe that's part of the appeal. The pyramids keep a few secrets to themselves, like a friend who knows just when to pause, letting you fill in the blanks with your own dreams. So, as you prepare to drift off, picture the pyramids glowing softly under a sky full of stars, their shadows stretching gently across the sands, timeless and serene. And remember, like those great stone triangles, your mind is full of mysteries waiting to unfold slowly, quietly, beautifully into sleep.